Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback, $2.99 ebook download, including my latest and greatest, NYPD Laughing in the Line of Duty. If you watch the epic documentary Cocaine Cowboys, you're going to know my next guest, retired Miami Dade Police Lieutenant Raul Diaz. Raul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic. I appreciate your inviting me.
Oh, please, the pleasure is mine. Raul, your life story would make for an epic movie. I mean, from how you and your brother got out of Cuba to your police career, and then later how you transitioned into a licensed private investigator. Could you go into what you and your brother and your family had to do to get out of Cuba?
My brother and I came into the country, into the United States, via an operation named Peter Pan, which was an operation put together by the Miami Catholic Diocese. And we came to the United States without our parents. We were lucky, my brother and I, that we came to our aunt and uncle's house, who were already settled in Miami. But most of the kids who came through Pedro Pan were placed in foster homes across the United States. And none of us knew when we were going to see our parents again, or if we were going to see our parents again. So we were lucky that our parents came 3 months later, and so we joined them. It was a very hard time.
And later on, you grow up. What made you become a police officer?
It was a trip that I took with two of my friends we went on a surf ferry in 1967. And when I was a president of a local gang, and I went with two of my friends on a surf ferry up the East Coast. And when we were in New York, I got a call from one of the guys in Miami telling me that the guys who were with me were going to bring, I don't know how many hits of acid from New York down in my car. And my car was, at that time, was my parents' car. So if we would have been stopped, the car would have been seized, my parents would have lost the car, and I would have been in a shitload of trouble. So I got back to Miami, and by that time I was studying criminology, so I was doing an internship with Miami Beach Police Department. And I told one of the guys in Narcotics what had happened, and then when I got back, I found out there was a couple of guys that were selling grass and acid, and then to my guys. So they asked me, would I buy from them? I said, okay, yeah. So I went undercover. I bought from them, and after that, I had been interested in. But what got me into that was that trip to New York in '67.
And so in 1967, you joined the police academy, and your police career almost ends before it begins because a visitor stopped by the police academy to check on you. Could you go into that?
Well, I didn't go into the police academy until 1971, but what I was doing in Miami Beach was a college internship. So anyways, yeah, in 71, my father-in-law used to work for the CIA. He's one of the original Watergate burglars, and at the time before Watergate, I was in the academy, so he sent Howard Hunt in with an ID of the Department of Justice to check up on me, to see how I was doing in the academy. So I didn't know about that, and all I knew was that afternoon I got called by one of the sergeants in the academy, who used to be a police officer in New York, and he says, I want you to sign your resignation. I said, what? I haven't done anything. He said, well, I want to know why the Department of Justice is looking into you. Why are they interested in you? I said, I have no idea. I have no idea why the DOJ would be interested in me. So anyways, I did not resign. He said, well, I'm going to be looking out for you. If you make the first mistake you make, you're out of here. Is that okay? So that weekend I went to my girlfriend's house, and my father-in-law was there. And he says, so I heard you're doing pretty good in the academy. I said, how did you hear that? He said, well, Aunt Howard went there and asked. I said, oh, my God, I can't believe you did that. You almost got me fired from the academy. So, yeah.
For people that don't know, E. Howard Hunt was an infamous spy. He basically was behind the Watergate burglary, and he also started Mission Impossible. He got it off the ground with some of his stories. He wrote screenplays. And your former father-in-law was one of the original Watergate burglars who later, after he does his time, gets out. The Cuban government approaches him and saying, "Hey, you got a bad deal with the United States government. Why don't you come and spy for us?" And then he joins the CIA again, and he starts going back and forth to Cuba. That must have been wild. I mean, obviously spies are tight-lipped guys. Did he ever say anything about the Watergate scandal to you?
No, he never talked about it. My father-in-law was never the people who worked for him in the infiltration teams, people who known him from when he was involved in counter-revolutionary activities in Cuba. They knew him as the mute because he never spoke about anything. He never talked about anything in which he was involved.
That would be a great name for a book if you were going to write about his life, The Mute.
Yeah.
So you were a rising star. I mean, you hit the ground running at Miami Dade Police Department, didn't spend much time in uniform. And everything I've read about you, your strength was your ability to build rapport with confidential informants. That was like that's what you were known for. And one of your first informants was a guy by the name of Ricky the Monkey Morales. And Ricky the Monkey bombed the home of a bookie whose wife was a Playboy playmate who just happened to be your mom's customer. And the guy's telling you the story as you're interviewing him to be a CI, and he's telling you, "Yeah, I blew up this guy's house," and you almost reached across the table and choked him on the spot.
Ricky Morales, what a character! First of all, when we started talking, he told me he went to La Salle private school, La Salle Catholic school in Cuba, and my father was his teacher. So that's how we started the conversation. Oh, nice guy, He's, I mean, I went to La Salle too, so here we are, two alumnus from La Salle, two alumni from La Salle together here talking and get informants for the FBI. So I was introduced to him, and my boss at the time told me, "I want you to get to know him, and I want you to go out with him, and he'll show you Miami, and he'll show you the real Miami." So I said, "Okay." So we're talking, and he said, "Well, I did this bombing of John Clarence Cook's boat and the car." I said, "You son of a bitch." I said, "You almost blew up my mom." And he couldn't believe it. It was my mom had left, and the bomb went off.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
He eventually was murdered, right?
Yes, he was murdered at a local nightclub in Key Biscayne in Miami.
In 1980, Fidel Castro decides to open up his prisons and mental institutions and send them to South Florida, known as the Mariel Boat Lift. Can you explain the impact that had on Miami?
The Mariel Boat Lift is a mini happening of what's going on in the south, in the south border here in the United States now. The government of Cuba did open up the prisons and their mental institutions. Thousand Cubans traveled from Cuba to the United States via a boat lift. And I would say of those people, close to 20% were criminals or mentally insane. And so here's a community, a small community, Miami-Dade. Not really small, but we had a million or so people, and all of a sudden we get hit with 20,000 mentally insane and criminal class people. And you have to understand that the kind of criminal that came in was not what we were used to. I mean, you had to be pretty bad to be a criminal in Cuba because they don't have any rights. I mean, they pick you up, they'll beat the crap out of you. Every time they pick you up, they'll kill you, But so we were faced with this new type of criminal in Miami-Dade. That happened at about the same time it happened at the same time that we were having the cocaine wars. and about the same time as we were having the 1980 riots. So it was an it had an incredible impact upon the quality of life and security of the citizens of Miami-Dade County. It was terrible.
You know, during the early part of my NYPD career, we averaged about 2,500 homicides in the 5 boroughs. And we had our share of high profile. I mean, a homicide is terrible, but then you have the high profile homicides. But everything I'm reading about Miami, I was doing research and I came across a few wild homicides. So one guy gets shot. He's recovering in the hospital from a gunshot wound. A guy sneaks into his hospital room, shoots him and kills him, then calls the hospital later on to see if the guy survived, which I thought, now that takes balls to an all new level just to confirm. Yeah. But the one homicide that you might have been involved in or investigated was that's always fascinated me was the Florida Turnpike shooting and homicide. You got 2 cars shooting at each other. The police get involved in the chase. The bad guys turn their attention to the cops and rake the police car with machine gun fire. The bad guys bail out of one of the cars, and in the trunk they find a couple of kilos and a body.
That was the beginning of the cocaine wars. That cost the war wagon in Dayton. That homicide came as a result of a ripoff of a safe house in which they had the maid was murdered. And then in retaliation, the guy in the trunk was murdered and his merchandise was stolen. That was one of the guy who took off running was a guy nicknamed El Loco Martel. And here he is in South Dade, approximately about 30 miles from Hialeah, and they stopped him based on the description. So he says, well, you know, I'm jogging. He says, well, where did you start jogging? He says, in Hialeah. he was arrested, and there was no question that he was the one who murdered the guy in the trunk. But in those days, it was just the beginning. We didn't know what we were facing, so he played bond and he went home.
That El Loco sounded like a real badass. Didn't he have something in California?
And then that cocaine was the beginning of the cocaine cops in 1979. That cocaine later turned into sugar and other ingredients in the property room, and cops made a lot of money out of that.
So the homicide investigators involving that shootout and homicide with El Loco, they take the coke and replace it with sugar and baking soda. And I'm sure once the case went to trial, the defense attorneys wanted to test it again or something.
I don't think it went to trial because El Loco took off, you know. So once they knew he was on bond, they knew they were not going to be using the cocaine as evidence. So they felt it was safe.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, if they figured he's in the wind, he's going to go back to wherever, and we've got the coke. Did you ever get a chance to interview El Loco?
No, I never did. No, that was before I went to Homicide. I was still in narcotics. I was in charge of narcotics for that area where that happened in Dayton. Dayton happened in my district.
So you were instrumental with all these drug homicides. You took the initiative in getting Centac 26 off the ground as a result of all these drug-related homicides. Can you explain how you did that?
I had worked in federal task forces before, and I knew of the advantage to being owned in a task force by the federal government because they gave you, you started with a zero budget. In other words, you asked, you got. You know, you needed cars, you got cars. You needed radios, you got radios. You needed money for informants, you got money for informants. You needed computers, they gave you computers. So I knew that the only way, and also because these homicide that happened in New York would cause a homicide to happen in Miami, that would cause a homicide to happen in Colombia, that would cause a homicide to happen in LA, that would cause, there was a chain. that it was a domino effect. One homicide, one place would cause a whole bunch of homicides in other places. So the only way to fight this, and the only way to find out uh, who was behind it and how to target these people, would have been a federal task force. So I wrote a paper, and at that time, Benzinger was still in charge of DEA, but Benzinger was a Carter appointee, and Reagan was in the White House. So Benzinger wanted to remain a director of DEA. So my proposal was very timely. I mean, it was something that he could do with, just pen, because he had everything available to him. And so he approved it, right? The first day that we met, he approved it. And so it was called Zentak 26 because there were previous 25. So we started it. I mean, and it worked. It worked real well.
Once Centec 26 is up and running, one of the first narcotics traffickers you guys wanted to take off the playing field was this guy, Amilcar Rodriguez. And Amilcar sounds, for those of you who don't know, Amilcar was like a Marvel movie villain. The guy had more lives than a cat. So just to give you a little background, before flooding Miami with 100 kilos a month, he escaped from a Venezuelan prison where he's doing time for the attempted murder of a cop. The guy was like Rasputin. You couldn't kill him. In addition to the 2 shootouts he has with Centec 26, he gets shot in a New York City disco. Then he goes into a pool in Pompano and someone tries lighting him up. How were you guys able to identify this guy?
We had an informant whose wife was a model, and he took a liking to Amilcar and left our informant. So the informant was a friend of Amilcar's and remained a friend after he took off with his wife. And we went to interview him, and he said, "You want him? I'll give him to you." So the first day we went operational, that was our first shootout with Amilcar. It was incredible. I mean, we started on Monday, and on Monday we started with a surveillance in Coconut Grove at the Mutiny Hotel, and Amilcar was there, and we followed him all around Coral Gables, and saw him coming out of a French restaurant. He told me he loved French shrimp soup, so that's what he was having for lunch. And then we followed him for about 2 blocks, and he stopped right in front of a Burger King with full of kids from high school, and that was the first shootout. And he did something that had never happened to me before. He and the driver remained inside the car, but shot through the windshield at us. And there was no opening of doors, no yelling, no screaming, nothing of that. It was just the doors remained open, and they opened up right through the windshield. One of my guys on the ear, and then they took off running. He had a Mariel boat lift guy with him. He was a driver, a black guy, a black Cuban. And my guy who was following him, the black Cuban took off running with his gun in his hand. My guy chased him, and since he had his gun in his hand, my guy didn't think that he should stop and say, "Stop, police, freeze," all that. He just whacked him with a Chevy and set them flying. So, in the meantime, Amilcar stopped the car, moved the driver over, and carjacked him. Drove to Biscayne Boulevard, which told the guy he was sorry that he had to carjack him, and took a car, but gave him a.
Then you went to pick him up another time. You get into another gunfight with him.
Day after, Wednesday, we this time we didn't get into a gunfight. This time, my guy got out of the car and just shot the shit out of him, And they didn't wait. They didn't wait for them to shoot at them. They knew what had happened before. They were there the first day, so they knew. And the car stopped, and the moment the car stopped, they opened up.
Did you ever get a chance to interview him?
Oh, yeah, we had a great time talking, you know. He confessed to a murder that he had done in Lima, Peru, because he told us that we had no jurisdiction in Lima. I said, okay. Oh, yeah, he was a smart guy, well-read, well-educated by himself, I guess. He was a reader, he's not a murderer.
Where would you rate Amilcar in the drug world's pecking order? Like, was he a supplier? Was he of Griselda Blanco? Was he a competitor? He seems like he's into everything.
He would have been an excellent below Griselda and the Medellin cartel and all that. He would be getting cocaine at great prices, and then he would distribute it himself or along with the people who work for him. And he also liked to kill people.
How many bodies do you think he had on him?
Well, when we were young and innocent, when we started Syntax 26, and we thought, here's a bad guy, we suspected him of 29 murders, and then 29 murders, and then we started getting people like, you get people like Rivi, and then you talk about people like Chucho Castro or Pablo, not Paco, Paco, and
Sepulveda?
people like that who had Paco Sepulveda. He was Griselda's brother-in-law, Dario's brother, and people who got 150 hits. I mean, it's incredible. Really, we suspected him of being involved in 41. I think he's confessed to 20 something.
Well, this Amilcar was such a badass that I read an article from the Miami Herald. He was planning an escape at the courthouse during his trials. Like he was like the type of guy he's never going to give up.
No, he never did. Milcar was Venezuelan. His father was the range master for the Venezuelan army. Say, Amilcar used to shoot with a 45 and light up matches at 25 feet.
He was a good shot.
Yeah, he was a very good shot. Yeah.
He takes a life. He took a life in prison sentence to avoid the death penalty. And everything I read about that guy was he took that plea because in the back of his mind, he always thought he was going to break out.
You're absolutely right. He always thought that he was not gonna be there for long.
Do you think he was that much of a badass? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You have to understand their mentality. Okay, their mentality is that their mentality from South America is buy the cop. If they can't buy the cop, they'll buy the prosecutor. If they can't buy the prosecutor, they'll buy the judge. If they can't buy the judge, then they'll buy the prison officials. So for them to spend time in prison is not a real thing. It's not, they're not going to spend time in prison. But then they come to this country and they find what our reality is.
Do you think he was that much of a badass and his intelligence that enabled him? Like he's probably the type of bad guy that's got like a 140 IQ where he's always thinking steps ahead just to keep ahead of whatever's coming at him.
Well, if he had a 140 IQ, Winston Salaverria, his nemesis, had 142, because he was always ahead of Amilcar. He's the one that shot him in the disco, and he's the one who shot him in the pool.
What's that guy's name? I got to write that down.
Winston Salaverria, Salavarria.
I'm going to look that up. His co-defendant, Amilcar's co-defendant, Borrego Acuerdo, flipped on him.
Yes.
Did you get to interview him? Was he a Venezuelan?
Who was that?
His co-defendant.
No, they were Cubans.
Oh, it was Cubans.
Yeah.
So another cocaine cowboy you get into a shootout with is Pablo Mello.
Yeah, Pablo. Incredible. Yeah, Pablo was, that the incident with Pablo allowed us in Homicide to be able to carry semi-automatic weapons. When we got into the shooting with Pablo Melo, the only person the only member of the homicide squad carrying a semi-automatic was me, because I had come from narcotics into homicide, and I still had permission to carry a semi-automatic. The rest of the guys in the squad, the rest of the guys there, only had 38s or 357s, and the 357s were not allowed to carry 357 ammo. They could carry 38. So I had 12 guys there besides and myself. So the guys from homicide had 72 rounds loaded in their weapons, and I had 14 because I had a Browning. So among all of us, we had 86 rounds, and Pablo by himself had, let's see, he had 60, 120, 120, 134 loaded. So he had almost double what we had. So when we got into the shootout, the next day, I get called into the captain's office. And the captain, I asked the secretary, do you have any idea why he's calling me? And she said, well, it has something to do with a gun that you had last night. So I knew that my captain in homicide at the time had to take me in. He was not very happy with the major telling him that he had to take me into homicide. He was a real homicide investigator. My captain was one of the greatest homicide investigators in the world, I think. I mean, he was an incredible guy. And he didn't want me in homicide because I was a narcotics kind of guy. And, he didn't understand why the major wanted me. So anyways, he called me on the carpet because I had taken a semi-automatic gun to a shootout. And he called me in. The major was in the meeting. And the captain says, why were you in possession of a semi-automatic last night at the shootout? I said, because I have permission to do that. And he says, who gave you permission? I said, here's a memo, give me permission. Even as he reads it, he starts laughing. And the captain looks at it, and it's permission for me to carry a Browning signed by my major. And the guy was his boss. So we got that out of the way. And then the major, but the major used to be my captain when we were in narcotics. He was my captain. He's the one who gave me permission to carry a Browning, and the permission still had one more year when I went into homicide. So I was authorized to carry that Browning. And now the major says, "Tell me about what happened last night." I told him. He says, would you recommend that homicide starts carrying semi? No, I said, so my recommendation would be that homicide starts carrying semi-automatics. And the major, being an old Marine, says, forget, we're going to carry fully automatic machine guns. And so we did. I was not in
sounds like
Sensac
every
at the
time you
time.
guys went to pick up a guy for a homicide, they were ready to shoot it out with you.
I'm sorry, Vic, what did you say?
I said, it seems like every time you guys went to pick up a guy for a homicide, they were ready to shoot it out with you.
Was because it was their nature. I mean, it was not, these guys were not, American desperados, all right? These people were Colombians, Venezuelans, Cuban desperados. I mean, these were really bad guys.
Were you involved in this, I think it's called the Kendall 6 homicide case over on King's Court?
Yeah, that was one of our cases, yeah. An incredible scene. I remember the uniform guy going in and he says, and requesting homicide because he found two bodies in the house, and he comes back a little bit out of breath and says, we have 4 bodies. And then he came back with a lot more loss of breath. And he said, we got 6 bodies. So off we went, and we got there. Yep, we had 6 bodies, 2 females, 2 males. The males had been strangled. They had plastic wrapped around their heads, and they had put tape around the plastic, so they died of asphyxiation. And then we had the 2 females who'd been shot.
Was that case ever solved?
Yeah, it was Rivi.
Jorge Rivi Ayala.
Yep.
And he was also involved in the Miami Dade land shootout and murder, right?
Rivi, no. No, Rivi was not involved in that. That was Carlos, forget the name now, but he was the driver of the car that was involved in the shooting of Barry Seal. It was
Cumbamba.
Cumbamba. Right.
Did you ever get a chance to interview Rivi, or that Rivi got grabbed after you had retired?
No, Rivi was after I left.
Did you know who he was back then? Like, was he on your radar?
No, he was not. You know what? I saw Rivi's picture when he was young, and I had stopped Rivi when I worked narcotics in the Kendall area. There was a car that had taken off at a high speed from a lounge, and we happened to be out and about, and we just pulled them, and Rivi was one of them, but they had nothing on them.
Right.
They had nothing in the car, no gun, nothing, so we had to let them go.
Were you chasing Griselda Blanco around, or was that after you retired?
I'm sorry?
Were you involved in anything with Griselda Blanco?
I was involved with Griselda Blanco when I was in narcotics, but not when it came to homicide.
How many homicides do you think she's responsible for?
Hundreds.
And I mean, from watching that documentary, Cocaine Cowboys, it seemed like she had an army of killers at her disposal.
I don't think she had an army of killers. She had people like Rivi, Chucho, Pablo, Paco, Darío. Her husband was an incredible hitman too. Darío was a very good hitman. So if you have people like that and each one is doing 50, 60 homicides, you got 300 right there.
You know, it's funny you bring up Chucho Castro, and I asked you that before we began the interview. If you watch Cocaine Cowboys, Chucho Castro's son gets killed by Rivi Ayala in a shootout. The little boy's in the car. Chucho calls the police and puts the child's body at a church. And then you were telling me the story that Chucho basically told you he was at the hospital. And could you just go into that?
No. He was calling me, and then, he would wait like a minute and a half. We would talk. He would hang up and go to another phone. And in the meantime, I'm following him because I have my phone. My phone was trapped by Southern Bell, and then we were tracing him. He would, wherever he called, we knew the address of the phone from where he was calling, and we would send cars. So we started closing it on him, and finally I got him. He spent a lot more a public phone at St. Francis Hospital than he had in any other phone before. So we traced him there, but by the time I asked Miami Beach police to not use sirens because he would be listening. So they used sirens, and we got there, and Chucho had jumped into the canal.
You said all you found was his shirt. He's never been seen again.
His shirt and his shoes.
That's another guy that was responsible for a shitload of homicides. He just kind of vanished off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Were you involved in anything with John Roberts and Mickey Monday for Cocaine Cowboys? Did you know them while you were out there, or?
No, I was not.
Did you know reformed drug lord George Valdez?
No, I didn't.
He's the guy, he was basically going to jail for a couple of years, and he handed his business over to Willie and Sal, Los Muchachos.
Oh, I know who he is, but I had nothing to do with him.
Oh, okay. And then he gets out of jail, and he says, you got anything for me? And they're like, we're not selling drugs anymore. It's a wonder that he didn't go back and try to kill him, but he turned his life around. He became a minister and everything. Another great read is a book called Hotel Scarface, where you're all over that book. It's about the Coconut Grove club and hotel called the Mutiny. And the place catered to drug dealers, basically, during the Cocaine Cowboys era. What was that place like? And you got any quick stories?
The place was unlike any other in Miami. It was you could go in there and know that it was a unique place. It was absolutely the best nightclub in Miami. It was not just for drug dealers. A lot of people went there. I mean, people who stayed in the hotel went there, and good people from Miami went there. So the head security guy was Pig's veteran, and he was a heavy set guy. He was a huge guy. Fernando Puig was but he was a funny guy. There was something happened on the floor, or so a fight about to start, and Fernando would run over there, and he used to carry a 38 snub nose and stuck into his waistband. Well, you get there, and the gun would be rolling down his leg, and it would be dark, and he would be saying, and then he'd be calling to his assistant there, Willie Lopez, who was a good kid. Willie, my gun, where's my gun? that was funny. Crazy Fernando. He was killed. He was murdered, not at the mutiny, right down the street.
Yeah, I was watching you in another interview, and I had a laugh because I could relate. Another interviewer asked you, he goes, he goes, what did you think of Miami Vice? Was it like what you guys were doing? And you go, I've never watched an episode. I almost fell out of the chair laughing, Raul, because people ask me, have I ever watched an episode of NYPD Blue or Blue Bloods? And I mean, I have no interest in it.
Neither did I in Miami Vice. I mean, when Miami Vice came out, I was in Narcotics. So what am I going to watch,
After you retired from Miami Dade PD, you became a private investigator, and you get involved in the Barry Seal homicide investigation, which I find fascinating. So for those of you who don't know, Barry Seal is this famous drug smuggling pilot. He gets caught, he flips, he becomes a government informant for the DEA, CIA, and every other federal agency. Then you have Iran-Contra comes to light. Barry's involved in that. He gets hung out to dry by the federal government, and he testifies. Well, then the Colombians send a cartel hit team to kill him. And after he's murdered, you're hired by the defense team, by the bad guys, to investigate the case. What was that like? That must have been amazing to work on.
It was amazing to work on, and it was more amazing because most of it was done in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I got a room at the Holiday Inn at the Baton Rouge and Lake Charles. I got a room there, and when the trial started, I'm approached by this young lady. I mean, too young for my taste, but I got approached by her, and she starts making passes at me. We went to happy hour after the case after trial with the attorneys and everything, and she's there, and so I get to the room one afternoon, and there's a bunch of flowers there, and with a card from her, and I'm thinking, nah, I look inside, I'm looking and there's a microphone. So what I did is I rented another room, and I spent my time in that room. I would talk to the attorneys, and we would not talk about anything on the phone. But whenever I wanted to send the police around on a wild goose chase, I would go into my room where there was bugged, and I would pull up, Paul New, Paul. What was the guy's name? The comedian who used to do the phone things. Bob Newhart. I would do a Bob Newhart on them. I would start a conversation, and then I wouldn't be talking to anybody. I would just say, okay, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to go here. And the next thing you know, you had all the cops going all over the place that I said I would be, and it wasn't there. But anyways, a lot of things happened in that Barry Seal case. Stupid thing that happened was that there were two guys that were watching the hit go down, and they took photos of the hit going down. Two Colombian guys were across the street at a motel, and they took photographs of the hit going down. Well, they took off, and they went to a safe house in Baton Rouge. They went to a safe house in New Orleans, and after the hit, they took off and they forgot the camera at the house. So the investigation leads to that house. The local police and the state attorney's office investigators get a search warrant, and the FBI is assisting. One FBI agent who wants to be a funny guy opens the back of the camera and exposes the entire roll of film, and he says, "I wonder whose family party we just canceled." And it was the film of the hit. And the FBI guy just exposed the whole roll of film. So it was a very interesting case. A lot of things happened there. And it was an impossible task to find, to get 4 Colombians found not guilty by a jury in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Okay, I can tell.
Who was bugging your room? Was it the feds? Was it the local
No,
cops?
it was the local sheriff's office.
And that's not legal.
No, of course not. It was not legal.
You know, a wild thing about that case is the killers flee and they get in a cab in Louisiana. The cab driver hits a deer.
That was Cumbamba.
Cumbamba. He's in the cab. The cab hits a deer. So they're on the side of the road with the cab driver. The police pull up. They've got the description of these guys, and they lock them up. And the cab driver's like, "Well, I'm the one who hit the deer."
that was his. When the cab driver testified, the jury just broke up. I mean, everybody was laughing because he was a funny guy, the cab driver. But here's the thing: Cumbamba is 6'2" or 3". He's a tall guy, big guy, and he was wearing green scrubs when they did the hit. They get out of the car. They drove the car from the Salvation Army to a church parking lot that was about maybe 5 blocks away. They get out of the car, Cumbamba wearing green scrubs, and Luis Carlos Quintero get out. They both get out of the car. Cumbamba was driving. They get into another car and take off. They go to New Orleans. So they get there. The shit hits the fan. Everybody is scrambling. The FBI is at the airport. And, well, for Cumbamba, 6'2" guy, Colombian, suspected Colombian, wearing green scrubs. The FBI stops him at the New Orleans airport. And they let him go. They interviewed him and they let him go. And Cumbamba gets into a cab. Like he gets a cab at the airport and he says, "Take me to the nearest capital." The guy goes, "Baton Rouge." He goes, "No, Baton Rouge. Take me to the next capital." He says, "Mobile." Okay, so they off they go. The guy says, "Well, it's going to cost you." So Cumbamba gives him a bunch of money and they take off. And that's when, in the evening, they hit the deer. They pull up at a 7-Eleven. The guy's got the hood up. The Cumbamba's out, and a sharp police officer sees this guy, a tall guy wearing green scrubs, and he stops. And that's when they surround the car, and the guy goes, "Oh, my God, listen, all I did was hit a deer." So that's what, yeah. So
He doesn't know he's driving around with a Colombian hitman in the back seat.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing about Barry Seal is, after he got arrested, the DEA in Miami and Louisiana didn't want to work with this guy. They wanted nothing to do with him. So Barry was pushy. He flies up to D.C., and then he speaks to then President Bush's task force on narcotics. That's how he gets involved in running drugs and guns during the Iran-Contra thing.
Let me tell you something about that, okay? Before that, back in 1984, I had a client who wanted to do a deal with the government. His name is Raul Rodriguez. He was an accountant for Willie and Sal and the cartels and all that. And so he got caught at Fort Lauderdale Airport with $5 million, and then they went to his house and they found a bunch of coke. So he was facing years in jail, and he had gone to college of the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. And he tapes what's a phone conversation between he and Tommy Borges, where Tommy Borges is asking Ramon to jump bail and go to Panama and help them set up a distribution and a money laundering and all that for Nicaragua. So I give that tape to the CIA. The CIA verifies that it is Tommy Borges on the phone. And we're going to start something, and then Barry Seal's cooperation comes up. Senator Paula Hawkins comes up with the whole thing that Barry Seal's doing, and so my part stopped. But I knew of Barry's cooperation way before he was murdered.
When you were working on that case, did you get a chance to interview Cumbamba?
Oh, I talked to all of them.
Everything I read about Cumbamba gives me the creeps. Now, you got to meet him, but I mean, he supposedly would drain murder victims' blood in a bathtub and then fold them up and put them in a box and put them on the side of the road.
That's not unique of him. That is not unique of Cumbamba. It is common among the people who were involved in the kind of things that he was involved. This life for these folks, life was very cheap in Colombia. They didn't care about anybody's life. Cumbamba was a cold-blooded murderer. But if you looked into the eyes of Luis Carlos Quintero, who was the hitman, the man who shot Barry, you would see no soul in there. They would see almost no life in there. It was beyond the shark food. Okay?
Yeah.
There was nothing. You talk to these people and you know they're different.
I know what you mean. I've locked up a couple of guys like that where they're just looking at you and you say to yourself, if it was between me and that door, they would go through me and not think twice about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know about this, and I forgot where I read it. I'll send you the article. But some journalist reaches out to Cumbamba, who's serving a life sentence in the Louisiana State Penitentiary, and he wants to do an interview with him. So Cumbamba writes him back, politely declines to do the interview, and sends him a painting he was working on.
Cumbamba was a good artist. He was a very good artist. He was a great painter. I mean, for a guy coming from his background, it was incredible.
So could you tell the story about the time you were surveilling a guy as a private investigator for some type of insurance thing that leads to a big arrest?
Yeah. He was casing a bank. Went the first day, he went to case the bank, drove around, went to the parking lot, came out. And then the next day, he drives to the bank. He parks. He takes a bandana and just pulls it over his face. And he robs the bank. Is that the case you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. So he takes off in his car, and my investigator is behind him, talking to the police, saying, "Oh, I'm following him north on this and south on that," and they nailed him. I mean, they had video of the guy robbing the bank.
That's one of those. Everyone's happy. The insurance company's happy because they don't have to pay out on the case. The bank's happy. The cops and the FBI are happy.
Oh, everybody's happy, yeah.
Raul, I'm curious. After you did that interview on Cocaine Cowboys, how often are you recognized?
How often what?
How often are you recognized as a result of being on that interview?
Oh, I mean, everybody who knew me knew that I did that, and then, but not walking down the street recognized as such. No, that never happened.
Raul, I could talk to you all day. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us today.
Vic, it's been a pleasure. I'm glad you called me now because who knows where my mind will be 2 years from today. I'm getting up there.
Your mind is
So
sharp as a tack to remember these things from 50 years ago.
I appreciate that very much, Vic. You take care of yourself.
Yeah, and as always, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially our listeners in Atlanta, Georgia, Nova Scotia, Glasgow, Spring Valley, New York, Crown Point, Indiana, and Revere, Massachusetts. If you work in law enforcement and have an interesting criminal background, drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you like the content, check out my Amazon author page. Type in my name, Vic Ferrari, like the car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free. Thank you again, and I'll see you guys all next week.